In the last episode, we ripped out the old tired suspension and installed a Dobinson's 3.5-inch lift kit on the landcruiser. This is the first mod I've done since rebuilding the engine, and overall it went really well. However, this cruiser went through a lot of neglect in a past life, and unfortunately it was driven for a long time without any shock bushings. When removing the old suspension, I found that the shock mount was completely worn down almost to the threads on the inside of the mount because of the metal-to-metal contact. Today, we're going to fix those mounts and install some more parts to help push this lift closer to the finish line. Stay tuned. Alright guys, so we're at my buddy Casey's shop now, and you'll remember in the last video when I installed those shocks and springs that the shock mount themselves were actually kind of worn down, as you can see there. So what we're going to do is we're going to stack some weld on there and grind it smooth, or maybe sleeve it to get the integrity of that shock mount back. So this is a quick tool that Casey just came up with. What we're going to use this for is to know when we've built up enough weld and grinded it down, and once this fits over it smoothly, we know that we have the exact outside diameter of what that old shock mount used to be. Well, that's one more item checked off the build list for the landcruiser. When I saw those shock mounts in the last video when I was installing the lift, I didn't expect to get them fixed anytime soon. In fact, I put them way back on the to-do list because it just wasn't that important to me. It was something that wasn't gonna fail, that needed to be fixed but didn't have to be fixed right now. But my neighbor Casey was willing to help me fix that right now, and now we're on our way. We have one item checked off the list, and we can focus on more lift-related fun parts. So today we're going to be installing Metaltech stainless steel extended brake lines, and then we're going to be putting on Metaltech rear sway bar brackets and Icon front sway bar brackets. The only reason why I chose Icon over every other brand is because they're machined out of a solid chunk of aluminum, and I just like that design more than everything else that was on the market and available to put on these 80 series. So we're gonna get those parts installed, take it for a test drive, and see how she does. If you're wondering what these drop brackets are, I'll try to explain. The sway bar is responsible for maintaining and reducing sway or roll. You may sometimes even hear them called anti-roll bars, but sway bar, it's the same thing. When I lifted the landcruiser, it threw off the suspension geometry for a number of things, including the sway bars. Now, this isn't quite as important, I guess, as fixing something like the caster or the panhard angle or other things that were thrown off after the lift. But if you don't drop them, it will cause the front driveline to interfere and contact the sway bar upon heavy articulation, and also there will be excess strain on the links. And for this last one, I'm kind of speculating here as I'm not 100% sure, but I would imagine that there is an ideal angle for the sway bars to be at as well. Now, a lot of people do disconnect their sway bars while driving off-road anyway, so this is going to be a topic for debate, as some people may just run without sway bars full time, or they'll just completely disagree with their importance as a suspension component in general. But since this truck sees all terrain, including the street, this is a very cheap and easy part of lifting this truck, which already has a lot of roll to it, and I don't see a reason for overlooking it. Seriously, this took me longer to record than it did to install, so in my opinion, it's an easy win. The sway bar drop brackets are installed, and there's two things I wanted to point out. The first one was that you may have noticed that I did not replace those sway bar bushings for the front or the rear, and the reason is I have them on order. They haven't showed up yet, but once they get here, we'll get those replaced for the front and the rear sway bar. Second thing was that you may have also noticed I did not tighten any bolts on the sway bar, and that's because with suspension, you're supposed to allow this thing to be settled. You're actually supposed to do sway bars like this on the ground, but since we're doing the brake lines, I have everything off the ground, and I had to install the sway bar, so I needed the room. But you're supposed to tighten everything once it's on the ground and the suspension is stabilized, so once we get it there, we'll tighten those bolts and get everything settled up with that. But for now, we can move on to the brake lines. So here's one of them. We're gonna be replacing this guy out with an extended one. The other one is on the driver's side, kind of in between the driver and passenger, right here. This one's getting replaced. And then in the rear of the truck, we're gonna replace this one way under here. You can't really see it, but take my word for it, it's in this area right here. I just finished up the front brake lines, and I have to say they're a really nice piece, but I'm not very happy with the way that they fit. Let me flip you around and show you what I'm talking about. So you probably saw in that last clip where I had to bend this bracket to get the brake line to fit, and I actually had to take it off the truck and take it over to the vise, bend it more off camera and straighten it out before this brake line would fit back in there. And I actually had to do the same thing for this bracket as well to get that side of the brake line to fit. And the reason is because the aftermarket line, you can see this top area of it here, is a lot shorter than the OEM line. So what happens, you see it's shorter there by about 1/4 of an inch. So what happens is you end up with a hard line that's too short to meet the soft line. And I guess, I just think for these lines being $100 or so, I thought they would just fit with no issues whatsoever. And they, as I said, they're a really nice piece, but I guess I just didn't expect to have to bend bracketry to get those to fit in there. Now, for the driver's side, we actually had no issues. The driver's side was a pain to do because of where it is. Let me show you. But it fit in there with no issues at all. Didn't have to bend anything. So this line goes up here, mounts to the inside of the frame rail, and you can see here, fit right up, no issues. So hopefully it's the same thing for the rear. I just wish it was that way for the other side too. Let's see if this thing fits without any modification. Looks like it's going to. Oh man, not a lot of space in here. The rear brake lines went on really easily too, just like the driver side did. So maybe a 93 Land Cruiser is just that off year being right after the 92, where the brackets on the passenger side are just different or something. Every other part in the Metaltech kit fit really well. So maybe just something with my truck and the passenger side. But now that that's all done, we can get started on bleeding the brakes and then take this thing for a test drive, see how she does. All right, everything is installed, and I actually had one issue over here when I was stomping on the brake pedal. I noticed that my hard line was leaking by the soft line, or the hard line was leaking where it connects to the soft line right here. And I have that thing pretty tight, so I'm thinking the flare inside's probably messed up. So probably gonna go bend a new hard line. Don't really need to do it now. I tightened it to the point where it's not leaking, but we're gonna get that fixed immediately before this thing becomes roadworthy, of course. And the other thing that I found was, do you guys remember when I was talking about the radiator leaking in the previous video? Well, when I took it off the jack stands, it started leaking coolant. And actually, it's the best case scenario. The clamp for the new upper hose right here was not clamping, and it was leaking from that hose. So I just need to get a new constant tension clamp, and we should be good on the coolant leak. That's a huge weight off my shoulders, because I thought I was gonna have to pull the radiator back out again and do that whole thing all over again. So we don't have to do that anymore. But anyway, that's enough rambling. Let's take this thing for a test drive. Before I leave, I'm gonna pump the brakes a few times and just make sure that that one line isn't leaking. So we're gonna hold pressure on this thing right now. There's a lot of pressure in the brake system, so if we had any leaks, we'll see it. I picked up a new line, I just need to make it. So we're gonna do this test drive on this old line. Just wanna make sure that there's no leaks coming out of here, and we're looking good. All right, let's hit the road. Truck did great. The suspension feels a lot better than what was on there. Of course, it was all blown and old, but man, it soaks up all the bumps on the road like nothing. The whole entire platform is more stable. You know, we did replace blown shocks and old coils and a missing front sway bar with a sway bar and brand new Dobinson's coils and springs. So we don't have a fair comparison back to what was on the truck, but what it has now is amazing compared to having blown suspension. Now I feel a little bit inclined to take the truck on the back of my property and just kind of mall crawl on my little dirt berms back there by the canal, just to see how the suspension does and if we can get any decent flex back there. I have the rear end pretty decently flexed out, as you can see here, and we have a ton of brake line left in there for travel. So this I'm gonna have to droop down probably another, I don't know, 6 inches or so to actually, you know, pull any strain on that line. It hit the bump stops before then, so we're looking good for the brake line travel. For the front, I need to get it up in a different spot to test it, but we're looking good. We have lots of length left on that brake line, and yeah, everything's working out great. Gonna wrap it up for this one, guys. As always, thank you for watching. If you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave this video a thumbs up and a comment, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later.